Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next lesson. Just a reminder that I originally developed this course for the Bangtan Academy Discord community, so if you'd like to find out more, please follow them on Twitter at BANGTAN Academy _, so you can get access to other materials and make friends to study with. You can also find me on Twitter at writer_court or on thebtseffect.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learn Korean with BTS Chapter 23. Let's go ahead and get started on page 82. Try the exercise out at the top with the 3 words and also listen with your language pen after this lecture. So all of the words on this page are pretty much souvenirs that you can buy in various shops in Korea. Of course, you can buy them at places that aren't souvenir shops as well, but these are very common souvenirs you might look for. So starting with the first 3 words at the top, we have 인형, which is doll, 열쇠 거리, keyring or keychain, 부채, 부채, which is fan. Moving down to the next 2 rows, we have 수저. This is spoon and chopsticks, like a set of spoon and chopsticks. 타석, magnet. 필통, pencil case. 책갈피, bookmark. 선 거울, hand mirror. 엽서, postcards. 티셔츠, t-shirt. 화장품, cosmetics or makeup. 김, this is like dried seaweed snacks. And finally, 홍삼, red ginseng. Then there are 2 example sentences at the bottom of the page. The first one says, 기념품을 좀 추천해 주세요, which means please recommend some souvenirs. And then 예쁘게 포장해 주세요, which means please wrap it up prettily. So if you buy something, you can ask them to sort of gift wrap it. It's not necessarily gift wrap like you see in Western stores around holidays, for example, but just nice wrapping, nice packaging so that you can give it as a gift. Moving on to page 84 and 85, we have our first key expression. This is 으면서. Let's look at the example sentences at the top first. The first person says, 자, 설명을 들으면서 구경하세요, which means please look around while listening to my explanation. The situation here is the person is a tour guide and they are at a historic site, I believe it's a temple, and they're going to look around while the tour guide explains things to them. But of course, they are Korean learners, so because they don't speak much Korean, they respond with the second sentence, which is 한국어를 잘 못하니까 쉽게 말해주세요, which means because I don't speak Korean well, please speak easily, or please speak in easy words, easy terms, basically saying, please speak more easily. I don't speak Korean well, so that way I can understand better. So looking at conjugation and use, this is for action verbs. This format expresses synchronicity of events in both the preceding and following clauses. So basically, this means that the 2 things are happening at the same time. So if we look back at that first sentence in A, they say, 설명을 들으면서, while listening to my explanation, 구경하세요, please look around. So those 2 things are happening at the exact same time. So it's important to note that the tense is put in the final clause, meaning at the end of the sentence, not in 면서. So if you say this in past tense, you're not going to conjugate the past tense into 면서 or the verb that it goes with. You're only going to put that past tense at the end of the sentence. Another important thing to note is that both clauses must take the same subject. So the example they've given, 보라는 드라마를 보면서 태는 이야기했어요. This is incorrect because there are 2 separate subjects for each clause. You're saying that Bora is watching a drama and Dan is talking, but because that's 2 separate subjects, you can't use 면서. The subject is also only revealed in the first clause. There's no need to mention it again in the second clause. So the example they've given, 보라는 드라마를 보면서 보라는 이야기했어요, which means Bora is talking while watching a drama, but they put the subject in there twice. So this sentence is also incorrect, but if you remove that second 보라는 that's in parentheses, the sentence would be correct. Now let's look at some conjugations on page 85. First we have 읽다. We're going to take off 다 and add 으면서 because it ends in a consonant. The example sentence, 책을 읽으면서 집에서 쉬었어요, which means I relaxed or rested at home while reading books. Next, we have 쉬다, which is to rest or relax. Take off 다, it ends in a vowel, so we're only going to add 면서. So we end up with 쉬면서. The example sentence, 집에서 쉬면서 책을 읽었어요, which means I read books while resting at home. So notice this is basically the inverse of the previous sentence. And here it doesn't really make a difference which one you put first because the actions are occurring at the same time and it makes sense either way. So the sentence could be read both ways and mean the same thing. Next we have 놀다, which is an irregular verb. So we're going to take off 다 and we're going to add 면서, even though it ends in a consonant. So we end up with 놀면서. The example sentence, 한국 친구와 놀면서 한국어를 배워요, which means I learn Korean when I hang out with my Korean friends. The next example, 듣다, digit irregular verb. We're going to take off 다. Digit changes to 리을, and this time, even though it ends in 리을, we do add 으면서. So we end up with 들으면서. The example sentence, 음악을 들으면서 운전을 해요, which means while driving, I listen to music. And finally, we have 굽다, which is a be up irregular verb. So we take off 다, be up changes to 우. It ends in a vowel, so we add 면서. We end up with 구우면서. The example sentence, 고기를 구우면서 라면을 끓여요, which means I boil ramen, instant noodles, while I grill meat. Moving on to page 86 and 87, we have the next key expression. This is 은데, 는데. Let's look at the two sentences at the top first. The first person says, 저기 기념품 가게가 있는데 지금 가도 돼요? Which means there is a souvenir shop over there. Can we go now? Or is it okay to go now? And the other person responds, 그럼요, of course. 하고 싶은 기념품이 있어요? Is there a souvenir you want to buy? I think the language pen translates to something like, do you have something in mind? Which that makes sense in context here because they're basically saying, do you have in mind a 사고 싶은 기념품? So something you want to buy, a souvenir you want to buy. So for use, this is used to present a situation or relevant information before presenting the second clause in the sentence. So really, this nende construction is a very common sentence connector, especially in spoken Korean. And it's quite simple, but it's also difficult at the same time, mainly because it's very versatile and it can often be replaced with other grammar forms. So think of it as a way to provide background information or set up the following part of the sentence. It's also an easy way to connect two shorter sentences together if they're related. So, although the function and meaning of this grammar point are pretty simple, its true nuances are honestly something that confuse even advanced learners. It's often translated as but or however, but that's not really the complete picture because it's not always but or however. Sometimes it's just a connector, sometimes it's just like saying so or and. So basically, this grammar links two clauses together, but those two clauses can have various types of relationships to each other. It can be additional information or contrasting information. And another way to think about it is that nende is a pretty weak connector. Think of a semicolon in English. It links two things together, but doesn't provide much info on the relationship between them. So, for example, it's a softer connector, but a connector like 지만 that shows contrast is a much stronger connector. And nunde can also be thought of in some cases as a good replacement for something like 그래서. So I'm going to link an example from Talk to Me in Korean. It's one of their podcast lessons, and they gave the example of two sentences. 내일 일요일이에요. Tomorrow is Sunday. 그래서 뭐 할 거예요? So what are you going to do? You could connect those two sentences together to make it sound more natural. So you would say, 내일 일요일인데, tomorrow is Sunday. 뭐 할 거예요? So what are you going to do? So like I said, it is quite simple, but it's also complex at the same time. So don't worry too much about understanding all the different types of usages for nunde right now. Just remember that it does link two clauses together. It's often presenting information that is either relevant or necessary for the second part of the sentence. Sometimes you're also using it to set up questions or suggestions. So if you want to learn more in depth about Ninde, I'm going to link that Talk to Me in Korean podcast in the extra materials on the Google Classroom. So you can listen to that. I think they go through 6 different types of usages if you want to learn more. So also of note here, you're going to use either inde or niinde for descriptive verbs when you conjugate, and you're going to use ninde for action verbs when you conjugate. For nouns, you're going to use inde to connect. This can also be used in other tenses such as past tense, future tense. The example for past tense is 왔는데, 얻는데, or for nouns, 이었는데, 였는데, and this is for situations that have already occurred or were completed in the past. So the 2 examples they give, 이상한 소리를 들었는데 뭐였어요? I heard a strange noise. What was it? The other example, 어제 생일이었는데 파티를 했어요? Yesterday was your birthday. Did you have a party? So now let's look at the conjugations. First, we have a descriptive verb. This is also a real irregular verb. So 멀다, we're going to take off 다 and also remove real. This leaves us with just 뭐. So because it ends in a vowel, we're going to add nian and then 대. So we end up with 먼데. The example sentence, 호텔까지 꽤 먼데 택시로 가세요, which means the hotel is quite far away, so take a taxi. And this is the seyo form, which is sort of a command or a suggestion. So basically, it's saying, here's the background information. The hotel is quite far away, so my suggestion is, why don't you take a taxi? Next, we have 춥다, which is be up irregular verb. So we're going to take off ta. Be up changes to u. It's a descriptive verb, so we add ni은데. We end up with 추운데. The example sentence, 너무 추운데 코트를 안 입고 나왔어요, which means it was so cold, but I didn't wear a coat when I went out. The next example, 먹다 for action verb, take off 다 and add 는데 because all action verbs are going to get 는데, so we end up with 먹는데. The example sentence, 밥을 먹는데 전화가 왔어요, which means I was eating and then I got a call, or I was eating but then I got a call. It's not necessarily contrast, but it could be saying I was doing this, but then this happened. It's just one of the many ways that ninde can appear. Next, we have 살다. This is also a Leo irregular verb, but it's an action verb. So we're going to take off ta and also take off the Leo. We end up with ha, but we're going to add ninde because it's an action verb. So we end up with 하는데. The example sentence, 혼자 사는데 집이 이렇게 넓어요? Which means you live alone, but your house is this big, or why is your house so large when you live alone? And then we have a noun example. We have 털이다. 털 is a temple. 이다 is the to be verb. So this becomes 털인데. The example sentence, 영궁사는 절인데 바다 바로 앞에 있어요, which means 영궁사, which is the name of the temple. 영궁사 is a temple, but it's right in front of the sea. Now let's look at the full conversation on page 88. The first person says, 자, 서명을 들으면서 구경하세요, which means please look around while you listen to my explanation. Again, remember he's like a tour guide and they're at a temple. That ta at the beginning is just like saying, well, it's just kind of a something you don't really translate so much, but it's just like saying, well, now let's do this or something like that. So it's not super important, but it's just a little interjection there at the beginning. The next person says, 한국어를 잘 못하니까 쉽게 말해주세요, which means because I don't speak Korean well, please explain in simple words, or please talk in simple words. The tour guide responds, 네, 영궁사는 바다 바로 앞에 있어서 경치가 아름다워요, which means because this temple, the name is 영궁사, because this temple is right in front of the sea, the scenery is really beautiful. I think the language pen says something like it commands a beautiful view or something like that, but the literal sentence here, 경치가 아름다워요. The scenery is beautiful. One of the girls responds, 바다 위에 철이 있는 것 같아서 멋있어요. So they translate this with the language pen to something like the temple looks like it's floating on the sea, so it's really cool, really stunning. So it doesn't say that directly, it just says 바다 위에 철이 있는 것 같아서. So because it seems like the temple is on top of the ocean, it looks really cool, it looks really stunning. So it's not a direct translation, but that's pretty much the meaning. It looks like the temple is like on or above the ocean. The other person responds, 맞아요. 오늘은 날씨가 좋아서 더 멋지네요. Which means, right, because the weather is good today, it looks even cooler. And then the other girl says, 거기 기념품 가게가 있는데 지금 가도 돼요? There's a souvenir shop over there. Is it okay if we go now? The tour guide says, 그럼요, of course. 하고 싶은 기념품이 있어요? Is there a souvenir you want to buy? Do you have a souvenir in mind that you want to buy? And she responds, 엽서랑 열쇠 거리를 사고 싶어요, which means I want to buy postcards and key rings. So I'll read it one more time. 자, 설명을 들으면서 구경하세요. 한국어를 잘 못하니까 쉽게 말해주세요. 네, 영궁사는 바다 바로 앞에 있어서 경치가 아름다워요. 바다 위에 절이 있는 것 같아서 멋있어요. 맞아요. 오늘은 날씨가 좋아서 더 멋지네요. 저기 기념품 가게가 있는데 지금 가도 돼요? 그럼요. 하고 싶은 기념품이 있어요? 엽서랑 열쇠 거리를 사고 싶어요. Finally, let's look at the shorter conversation on page 89. The first person says, 부모님께 드릴 선물을 사고 싶어요, which means I want to buy a present to give to my parents. Notice we're using honorifics here with 께 as well as 드리다 instead of 주다. The other person responds, 내일 국제 시장에 갔는데 같이 갈까? Which means tomorrow I'm going to the market, this 국제 market. Should we go together? The other person responds, 좋아요. 그런데 보통 어떤 선물을 사요? 고민돼요. Which means sounds good, but what kind of presents do you usually buy? I'm worrying or I'm deciding what to get. That 고민돼요 at the end is kind of like saying, I don't really know what to buy. So I'm kind of worrying what should I buy? And that's why they asked, what do you usually buy? And the other person responds, 나는 김하고 수초를 살 거야, which means I'm going to buy 김, which is seaweed, dried seaweed, and 수초, which is spoon and chopstick set. 내일 같이 보면서 골라보자, which means let's decide tomorrow while looking at it together. So I'll read it one more time. 부모님께 드릴 선물을 사고 싶어요. 내일 국제 시장에 가는데 같이 갈까? 좋아요. 그런데 보통 어떤 선물을 사요? 고민돼요. 나는 김하고 수초를 살 거야. 내일 같이 보면서 골라보자. So that's it for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one.